I'm delighted today to be able to talk with you about women filmmakers who comment on contemporary China through their cinematic practice. And I'm going to talk particularly about the film you're going to see this afternoon. Let me just tell you in advance, there will be a few spoilers, but I think the spoilers will make sense to you as we go along, because I'm going to contextualize the film in a way that you'll get kind of the insider look at a film that has a lot of inside jokes in it. So I think that you'll appreciate the film a bit better with some of these spoilers. So bear that in mind, and I'll let you know when the spoilers come up if you want to just close your ears like this when I get to that. Now, the first contextualization that I want to present to you is Me Too. This is a film that was produced before Me Too, the current movement in 2017 kind of hit the world stage. It was a film that came out at exactly the same time. So Me Too context is very important to keep in mind because it is about women who are working in the creative industries in China. And it's interesting to see how the film resonates with what was going on with Me Too. So keep that in the back of your mind. Just to go through Me Too, obviously Me Too 2017 was not the beginning of Me Too. Me Too started in 2006 with Tarana Burke and the Me Too movement that was to highlight the fact that so many women have been victimized by sexual harassment in various ways throughout their lives, and that sexual violence has touched so many women's lives. Now, obviously, in 2017, putting the hashtag in front of it, Alyssa Milano is usually credited with the more contemporary movement that circulates around Harvey Weinstein and the movements that kind of rippled out of that, including Time's Up, 4% Challenge, et cetera. So Me Too started as kind of an American phenomenon, and a lot of people here in the States think of it as only an American phenomenon, but of course it's not. When you look at Harvey Weinstein even, you see Harvey Weinstein is a transnational figure, and he's a figure that really touched Asia in so many different ways. He had many filmmaking concerns, of course, in Hong Kong, but also in mainland China. And he also had people in his circle who were part of the Chinese diaspora. And one of them is Ruina Chu, who is one of the major interviewees in the book She Said. And she was really traumatized by her relationship with Harvey Weinstein in so many ways. He attempted to rape her at the Venice Film Festival in 1998. And contextualizing that with all kinds of kind of racist discourse surrounding his advances toward her and his violent behavior. And the fact that she was, of course, intimidated by him and tried to stay afloat with her own career in the film business after this encounter, including at one point working still for Miramax, going to Hong Kong and working in his office there. And then eventually, I think you know the story from She Said. The movie should still be playing in the local theaters. Some of you may have seen the She Said movie, Maria Schrader's movie this year, with Ruina Chu as one of the main characters in that film, as one of the main informants of it. So this connection to Asia, of course, is there through him. I highly recommend, if you're interested, I'm going to give you a few academic pointers along the way for those of you who are interested. I highly recommend my former colleague's work, Sylvia Martin, who's still at University of Hong Kong. She's written a book called Haunted, which is about Hong Kong Hollywood comparisons in terms of the movie industries. And one of the main comparisons she makes is the prevalence, really, of sexual harassment and sexual violence within both industries. She's also written an essay that I have here cited on the relationship between the globalization of Hollywood and the way in which those kinds of patriarchal discourses filter through and resonate with sort of similar patriarchal discourses in other parts of the world. So I highly recommend her work. Now, let me go to China, 2017. to kind of more specifically contextualize this, not in Hong Kong, not in the Hong Kong connections, not in Harvey Weinstein connections, but in Beijing. So let's go to 2017 Beijing, and right in the few weeks following, really, the announcement of Harvey Weinstein allegations that were breaking through at that time, the Me Too movement that was breaking through at that time. Almost immediately, there was an editorial written by a person who, Sava Hassan, who was an English teacher in China. And what he said was, Me Too Me Too means nothing in China. There is no sexual harassment in China. He'd lived there a few years. Well, immediately, the internet blew up. And it went on fire because so many women there had been victimized by sexual harassment, had been, by all these kinds of predators. And a lot of these stories were centered around the entertainment industry, higher education, and the film business. So immediately, too, if you know about the China internet and all everything that goes on with it, these people were immediately censored. And in order to get around the censorship, they started using a different hashtag. And you can see it here, me and too. So rice, me, and too means bunny. So rice bunny, if anyone talks about rice bunny feminism, it's Me Too, rice bunny feminism. And that's the movement there, to get around the censors. Now, we're 5 years, okay? 2017, 2022. 5 years on, where are we in terms of China? I just wanted to say a couple of things because it's in the news. Chris Wu has been sentenced for rape in China just this last month in November. He is a Canadian citizen, so that's something to keep in mind. So the most notable case of someone actually being convicted of rape in the entertainment business is not Chinese. He's Chinese-Canadian, and he will be deported after he serves his prison sentence there. The other major case in the entertainment industry that came to the fore and that people have been struggling with for many, many years is Xianzi, Zhou Xiaoxuan's case. And her case was against a television host, Yu Jun. And as of April of last year, she's lost her appeal. So they've been going back and forth. He's been suing her. There are a lot of countersuits, particularly in Asia, for defamation, slander, libel, those kinds of suits against people who bring Me Too accusations against powerful men. And they have not been doing quite as well. Now, let's go to specifically film school. Now, when we look at Me Too, one of the major ripples that happened after Me Too is people began to talk about what's going on in film school. How are young filmmakers being educated to look at women, treat women in front of the camera and behind the camera? So several film educators, and I know we've got a few in the audience today, several film educators have talked about how do we teach film now that Me Too is changing the way in which the public thinks about filmmaking. One of the prominent people who've done this is Nina Menkes, and she's wrote an essay early on, which I think is a really important essay called The Visual Language of Oppression. And in it, she talks about an almost Jim Crow-like atmosphere in particularly Hollywood, but also other aspects, indies, other aspects of American filmmaking, in which women are really segregated into certain jobs and really unable to break through in ways that men can. And certainly a lot of people talk about, for example, the one film phenomenon in terms of women getting funding for one film that may do well, but whereas that might be the start of a career for their male peers, it's the end of the career for the woman filmmaker who cannot get a second feature funded. And that phenomenon exists, of course, in the US, but it also exists worldwide. Now, how to counter that? How is film taught, or how do we think about film? I think many of you are familiar with Laura Mulvey, a pioneering figure in feminist film criticism, who talks about the male gaze. So she talks about cinema as being predicated on the way men look at women and the way in which women are objectified through the male gaze. Now, when we look at that in terms of how women look at women, we have a lot of variations in terms of women critiquing how men look at them, to doing other things with how women are looking at themselves on screen. And that's what I'm talking about today, because I'm talking about women filmmakers. Now, how do women look at the male gaze? Well, many of them don't. Many of them instead say, well, men may gaze in a desiring or in a punitive way at women. They want to possess them, or they want to punish them. But actually, a lot of cinema is about, particularly women's cinema, is about what Lily Loughborough calls the male glance, that men dismissively look at women, glance at women, turn away and say, I already know everything about her. I don't have to think about her anymore. The way in which men categorize, dismiss, devaluate, or tend to underestimate in many ways women is as agents, as narrative agents in film and otherwise. Now, when we look at stories specifically designed for women or featuring women characters, some of them by men, these are stories that have really resonated with female audiences, but also with female filmmakers around the world. So if you look at a story like Letter from an Unknown Woman, which started as a European novella, became a well-known Hollywood film, it's basically the story of a woman who writes a letter to her former lover that she's had a child with, and the lover has no clue who she is, because he's been so dismissive of her. Now, even though it seems like melodramatic excess and all kinds of improbabilities at the root of this kind of story, that the idea that a woman filmmaker in China, Xu Jinglei, would find this story very compelling in 2004, all right? So this is a contemporary film. Says something about the fact that women indeed experience male neglect in a way that resonates with them emotionally and then also visually. So she also plays the main character in the film, the unknown woman, and we see her obviously glimpsing, just looking out the window, trying to catch a glimpse of the object of her desire, the man in her life who has no clue who she is. We see this same kind of visual language appearing over and over and over again in films from around the world, but I'm only going to focus on those that are from the Chinese-speaking world today. I want to just highlight a few for you. Flora Lau's Bends, she's a Hong Kong filmmaker and made this movie which is about border crossing. It's about the border between Hong Kong and mainland China. So it's about the two cities there, Shenzhen and Hong Kong, that are kind of twin cities on either side of the border in certain ways. Now, it's an upstairs-downstairs story, okay? So the trophy wife of this guy called Leo, and you see her from the back here, is the main character in the film. And we only get a glimpse, a very brief glimpse of her husband. He only appears in a couple of scenes early in the movie before he walks completely out of her life, and her life falls apart because she no longer has him as the source of income. So her house, all of the stuff in her house begins to disappear because as he sucks it all away and never reappears. So she catches a glimpse of him, and he glances away at her as he says goodbye and walks out of her life. The parallel story from across the border is also interesting. It's about her chauffeur and his wife. Now, his wife has to stay behind closed doors because it's during the one-child policy and she's pregnant with a second child. So she can't let the neighbors see. And she only catches a glimpse of her husband as he runs off to work across the border, trying desperately to try to get away for her to come to Hong Kong in order to have the baby. So we get this kind of sense of desperation with these women who can only get a glimpse of these men as they're trying to negotiate a world in which they are really dismissed, visually dismissed throughout. Another Hong Kong film. This is by Anne Hui, called A Simple Life. And in this film, an elderly domestic servant only gets the sidelong glance from her young employer. Later on, that relationship develops differently, but at the beginning, you can see here how he doesn't even look at her. She serves him, is constantly being attentive to him, and she only is glanced at from the sidelong glance that he gives her in this kind of dismissive way. Now, when we look at this, too, we can see it develop even further in other films by women. So I'll go across the border now, and we're going to focus the rest of the time on Beijing, not Hong Kong, not Shenzhen, but Beijing. So we're going to go to the capital of the People's Republic of China. Now, when we go there, we're going to focus now on stories that aren't about men and women, but really about women as they think about how men see them, and oftentimes don't see them, how they're invisible to the men in their life. Now, I wanted to start with this film because it resonates really well with the film you're going to see in a little while, Girls Always Happy. This film is called Perpetual Motion, and it's by a woman filmmaker called Ning Ying. She's a Beijing-based filmmaker. For those of you who are film fans, she's part of what's known as the fifth generation. But unlike her better-known peers, Chen Kaige, Zhang Yimou, etc., she's not as well known. Now, on the other hand, she's quite prolific and has made many, many films and has very strong connections, international connections, particularly to Italian cinema. Now, when we look at a film that she made called Perpetual Motion, it's a film that only has women in it. There are no men. So these women, and it's interesting, these women are coming together in Beijing, and they come together in order for one woman who's married to the one man that they're all involved with to find out who's sleeping with him. Because he's got a mistress, but she doesn't know who in their circle is his mistress. So it's one of these kinds of like trying to ferret out kind of a mystery story of who is he sleeping with. It's interesting because of the way she approaches how to kind of smoke out who amongst her circle is sleeping with her husband. And these are all elite women who are living in kind of a gentrifying part of Beijing. And they are all people who are professionals, an actress, a real estate agent, a magazine editor. All of these people are part of this kind of new, kind of creative, upcoming class. They're all powerful women, but they are all obsessed with this one man. And this one man is also not quite that powerful or on a par with them, but for them, he's like a god. So when we look at it, how do they try to figure out, or how does the wife try to figure out who's the mistress? Well, a lot of it revolves around trying to figure out, looking at these other women and figuring out how this man, whom you never see except in a photograph, looks at them, right? And which one would he look at with the most desire? So the hostess invites them all to lunch, serves up some chicken feet, okay, phoenix claws, as they're known in Chinese. And as they're eating, okay, it's trying to figure out who is the one that the husband would find the most attractive, right, the most sensuous. All right. Now, in this kind of play amongst the women that you see in Perpetual Motion and you see in several other films. There's also an undercurrent. In that particular film in Perpetual Motion, one of the characters is bisexual. So they have this one bisexual character, and there's also this interplay of, well, how do the women see each other? Do they ever see each other in an erotic way? So across Chinese filmmaking today, there's a lot of emphasis, particularly in women's film, on girlfriends. And women who look at each other sometimes as rivals for a man's affection, sometimes as comrades in arms, sometimes as fellow sufferers, and perhaps sometimes, if you look at what Adrienne Rich calls the lesbian continuum, sometimes in an erotic way. And you'll see an undercurrent of this, not so much in Girls Always Happy, but in other films made that deal with women who are being dismissed by the male glance, but find something amongst themselves that needs to be thought about or celebrated. And I just want to give you one example of this in Sylvia Zhang's film 20, 30, 40 about the generational differences in women's lives at the age of 20, 30, and 40. And the younger women tend to have this kind of more open attitude toward their own sexuality. Now, let me get to the meat of what we're talking about today. Yang Mingming. Yang Mingming has made one feature film, Girls Always Happy, which was distributed globally in 2018. She was making it in 2017. Female Directors was an earlier film that she made in 2012. She stars in both of them. So she loves to, her background is as an actress, she's trained that way. She didn't go to the Beijing Film Academy, by the way. She went to the Theatrical Academy, also in Beijing, where she was trained. But she is interested in how women develop, as you can see from Female Directors, how women develop as directors, directing themselves and directing other women, which is what she really specializes in. Now, both of these films, both of these films feature very strong female dyads. That kind of girlfriend dynamic you see in Female Directors, where the two women are fighting over one man in their life. They're fighting over who's the best film director, who even should be a film director. They're desperate because neither of them is legal to stay in Beijing. They're fighting over who should have legal status and how they should get it through the men in their lives, etc. So this kind of tense, but also sometimes intimate and often almost erotic relationship between these two women. Now, in the film you see today, that dyad is different. It's generational. So it's a mother and daughter story. Now, both the mother and the daughter have girlfriends, but they're more peripheral to the story. And it's really this generational battle between these two women that you're going to see today. But the same themes over creative access, creative control, over money, how to survive in an environment in which men hold all the cards, and a lot about the domestic issue of where do you live? How can you live? How can you survive in Beijing that's so rapidly changing, where people don't know where they're going to be able to live from day to day? So the same themes in both films, but different emphasis on the relationship between the women. Now, getting back to that context of Me Too, just as this film was being made and produced, one of the first big cases to kind of break through on the internet in China's Me Too was a case at the Beijing Film Academy. Now, as I said, Yang Mingming didn't go to school there, but she for sure knows people who were involved in the academy, and many of them appear in the film. So, as she was making this film, people were thinking about these sexual assault cases that were beginning to surface. As a matter of fact, one of the first responses on the internet to that English teacher who said, oh, there's no sexual harassment in China, was from another foreign student from Europe who had been studying, a man who was studying at Beijing Film Academy. And he said, my goodness, here at the Beijing Film Academy, I see women harassed all the time. I don't know what this English teacher is saying or denying or what have you, but I see it all the time. And that was one of the first things that appeared on the internet. Now, who's there? Now, this is where we get into some spoilers, but also I think things that will help you enjoy the film more. So, like I said, hold your ears if you don't want to hear it, some of it, but I would recommend listening. Wu is the name of the character. Who's Wu's girlfriend? Who's Wu's boyfriend? The boyfriend is played by someone who essentially is playing himself. And his name is Zhang Xianmin. He plays a character called Zhang Xian. Now, it's interesting. Zhang Xianmin is really a teacher at the Beijing Film Academy, and he's also really an indie film producer. So keep in mind, you're watching an indie film by a woman in which she casts an indie film producer as this kind of lukewarm boyfriend of the main character that she plays. So you have all this kind of doubling and kind of mirroring going on in the film. That's kind of interesting. Now, he plays an ambivalent character. He's for sure not a sexual harasser in the film. But he is a character who has this dismissive glance at the protagonist. Now, who else is there? He's got buddies in the film. His buddies are also all indie filmmakers that are well known in China, including Wang Liren, Wang Min'an, and Jidan. Now, Jidan is also a prominent woman filmmaker, but in this film, she's as dismissive as of the men of the younger generation of women coming up. So when someone asks in the film, now listen for it, and a little bit of a spoiler, she's the one who says, oh, is she your student? Should you be having this affair? Essentially implying, should you be having this affair with your student? And of course, Zhang Xian says, no, she's not my student. She's already graduated. She's off on her own making films. So this kind of implicit assumption that the teachers are sleeping with their students at the Beijing Film Academy surfaces in the film. Now, of course, Wu, who's played by Yang Mingming, the main character, is not part of the Beijing indie team. She is looking off from the side. She goes off and does her own thing while they are critiquing films and deciding on what films are worthy or not worthy of being shown in a film festival. So you get this sense of her outsider status as a young woman filmmaker. By the way, I just want to point out another thing. Notice in the film, her mother doesn't even have a name. Her mother has no name in the film. So this gives you a sense, too, of how Yang Mingming is looking at the insignificance or the social insignificance of the women who are part of this ongoing kind of circle of people who are on the periphery of the entertainment industry, dominated by men. Now, when we look at these other kind of indie connections in the film, what we see are, the fact that the mother, I'll call her Wu's mother because she has no name, Wu's mother is played by an actress and producer, Nai An. And now she's best known for working with another indie filmmaker, Lo Ye, who's very well known for Suzhou River and other films, Summer Palace, what have you. Also, she has a character who plays kind of a street lady, who's kind of a vendor, who's the mother's best friend. And now that woman is played by Li Qinqin. Now, Li Qinqin was also in that other film I mentioned, Perpetual Motion, and she's kind of a fixture as a fairly well-known, actually, television actress, but also as somebody who likes to be in indie films made by women. So she's someone that the people in Beijing would know about as being part of this kind of group. Now, let me just go through a few things to look for in the film. Once again, think about the glance, the male glance. The fact that women, as you see here, here's Yang Mingming, the men in the film barely glance, or the key men in the film barely glance at the women in their life. And the women tend to be excluded from all of the deal-making and the power moves within even the indie film world. Now remember, this is the periphery of commercial filmmaking. You also see how the way in which Yang Mingming sees this character that she's playing as oftentimes dwarfed or infantilized or diminished visually in the film. And you also see her literally below the folks who have power above her. And in this case, that power is always seen in relationship to the film industry and the television industry in which she's trying to become a part. So in this case, she's gone to a television studio to see her boyfriend, give an interview on the power of film criticism. So feel that from the, patriarchal bastion that film criticism still is. And you can see this kind of power dynamic playing out that Yang Mingming is criticizing. Also, think about the way in which in the film there's a lot of reflection on the creative process, and both the mother and the daughter are trying to break into the creative industries through writing. So the mother writes and the daughter writes. They do various kinds of writing. The daughter, the Wu character, is primarily a film writer. So she's writing for the screen. But the mother is also doing other kinds of writing, short stories, poetry, etc., and so does the Wu character. So they have this kind of dynamic where they have a lot in common, but there's the generational difference, and there's also this kind of difference in this creative process in which there's a lot of rivalry. So keep that in mind, that the mother-daughter relationship is one of rivalry, not just based on the fact that they're related and are having, family difficulties, but the family difficulties reflect the creative environment of Beijing. Now, the film is also about economic relationships among people and dependency. And a lot of what it's about is within the creative industries worldwide, and particularly in this film, you feel it in the Chinese context in Beijing, that precarity that they're experiencing. They're on the edge. I highly recommend Lauren Berlant. They passed away, I guess about a year ago, a little over a year ago. It's a sad loss for all of us. But I highly recommend this book, Cruel Optimism, in which they talk about this kind of filmmaking, a cinema of precarity, that's highly melodramatic and about the kind of economic experiences of people today in the new economy. And the new economy is particularly raw in China. And it's particularly difficult in the world of the entertainment business. And in that world, it's really difficult on the women. And how is that seen in the film? Well, keep your eye out for economic mentions. And one of the mentions, of course, is fashion and consumer goods. That's mentioned visually. And then also, keep an eye out for how the film is structured. The film is structured around food. So keep an eye out for the way in which it moves chapter by chapter in terms of these food items that are particularly associated with Beijing. Milk, because Beijing is in the north and is influenced by Mongolia and all these kinds of people who are herders, and they have milk. Lamb, because they're also in the herds, have a lot of lamb. Honeydew, because Beijing is up north, but also gets the desert storms from the Gobi Desert out west, where there's Xinjiang, where they grow the honeydew. And then also duck's tongue. Remember the phoenix claw from Perpetual Motion I mentioned? The duck's tongue here functions in a slightly similar way, okay? In trying to figure out this delicacy, is it a delicacy or is it a sign of greed, lust, okay? So think about the duck's tongue too. The other thing I want to point out is Beijing as a place. As much as some of these themes can be seen globally in terms of the way women are treated, the global film business, etc., the film is also very much a Beijing film. It's set in the hutongs. This is an image of the hutongs that you can see a little bit better than perhaps in parts of Girls Always Happy. The hutong is not in the daylight, it's in the darkness very often. So here you see the hutongs from female directors, but you also have the character navigating through, and this is obviously Yang Mingming playing the protagonist, navigating through the hutongs like she owns them, but also sometimes getting lost in the hutongs, getting lost in Beijing. I wanted to show you too an overview, and this is from Perpetual Motion, of what the hutongs look like. These neighborhoods are alley after alley of walls. And behind the walls, you have these compounds, these Siheyuan, which are the compounds with the courtyard homes. So as you look at the film, think about the way in which Beijing itself encloses women's lives and keeps out certain possibilities. Now, many of these hutongs are being gentrified and people are being thrown out of them. Other hutongs are just decaying and are going to be bulldozed. So where you are in these hutong environment, you might be at the bottom of society or you might be at the very top of society. So keep that in mind as you think about the architecture and the hutong life. I'm just going to show this for just a second, just to give you a sense of Yang Mingming is very cognizant of the way in which space cordons off life, but also creates a lot of anxiety. There's no, if you're on the bottom rung especially, there's no privacy in the hutong. They've been subdivided. They leak. They don't have modern plumbing. You'll see in the film. And there's a sense of both community, but also there's a sense of lack of privacy. Everyone knows your business, and everyone knows how you're doing economically or not doing what you're not doing economically. The other thing I want you to keep an eye on is that real estate connection. The characters in the film are obsessed with real estate. They are obsessed with where will they live, how will they survive. And you'll see in the film, I won't give it away, key to some of this for both of the women characters, the mother and the daughter in the film, is this guy, Ye. Ye, of course, means grandpa, but whether he's really related to them, probably not. But in any case, they're hoping to inherit his apartment. And a lot of the humor in the film revolves around Ye and the male glands, because Ye doesn't care about them. They come in, they clean for him, they cook for him, they look out for him, only because they're hoping beyond hope that they will inherit from him. Will they or won't they? See if you find out in the film. In any case, they're hoping, of course, that he may die. Ye does not want to die. And when they're looking down on him with that kind of Medusan stare, watch for it in the film and see how Ye reacts. Now, I just wanted to point that out to you, not to give it away, but just to tell you there's a lot of humor in the film, and please enjoy the humor. I would call it Medusan humor. This is the kind of humor that the film critic B. Ruby Rich talks about as feminist in nature, that this is the way in which women very often will, as you can see with that interplay between the two women and Ye, look at men in a way that neutralizes their patriarchal power. I also want you to look in terms of viewing relations with what Bell Hooks, the late Bell Hooks also passed away recently, well, a couple of years ago, the oppositional gaze. Looking at the way in which Yang Mingming resists all of those patriarchal dynamics in the film. Just go through a few right now. One of them, of course, involves using the way you look, using the way that people need to use the way you look in order to make money to survive. So here is Wu and Ye scamming a grocery store in order for Ye to get some extra coupons, etc., that they're going to be using. Also, think about the oppositional gaze in terms of the way in which Yang Mingming is in conversation with international cinemas, and the way in which international cinema looks and critiques the male gaze. Of course, Jean-Luc Godard, also just recently passed away, is known for that. If you look at Vivre sa vie, and if you look at a rhyming shot from Girls Always Happy Here, you can see that this idea of women literally turning their back on the camera as a statement on how men are looking at them and how they are being seen as objects on the screen and denying that kind of gaze, denying the male gaze. You also see a lot of humor in the film. Here you're seeing Wu from Zhang Xian's point of view with the apple just out of reach of a poor Wu's mouth as she's in this contraption in Wu's apartment. And you get the play between those two characters where for some people he looks like he's kind of a good guy. I would say think again when you think about Zhang Xian as a good guy or a bad guy. So that's one thing to kind of look out for, particularly his little gifts to his much younger and less powerful girlfriend, such as the face slimmer. Now also look at a lot of the self-deprecating humor in the film, which is kind of interesting too. There's a lot of this kind of post-menopausal romance that parallels a lot of things you see in women's filmmaking in China and I guess elsewhere, but especially in China that I've noticed. So Anne Hui's film, The Postmodern Life of My Aunt, has that kind of relationship of a woman, after menopause having a relationship with a man, of course, who's no good. And the same kind of relationship happens with Wu's mother in this particular film, where she's got, of course, a bad news boyfriend. This idea of being left over, which many of you might know about, the shengnu, the leftover woman, is something that we see in the press in China that a lot of people have commented on here in the US as well. The idea that if you're over 30, forget it, you're not going to find a man, and if you're overeducated, you won't find a man, and if you're too picky, you won't find a man. And it's actually the Chinese government that supports this notion. There's also this other notion, too, of left behind women, where you see older women of a certain generation, people who came of age really in the Cultural Revolution, who lost out on their education, who lost out on many financial opportunities, who also could only have one child, often only a girl then, particularly in urban areas, and lost out then on having any kind of ability to kind of put themselves forward in a society in which upward mobility was something everyone was coveting at a time when society was being unleveled, right? So you see a lot of this also in The Postmodern Life of My Aunt. If you're interested, I've written an essay on that I invite you to read. In this particular film, in Girls Always Happy, look for it in terms of that older woman, right? Here is the mother's gaze. What does the mother desire? If we think of the gaze as opposite of the glance is dismissive, but the gaze is desiring. What does the mother desire? What is she looking for in the daughter? What does she expect? How does she expect the daughter to look at her? There's a lot of banter in the film about you're looking at me a funny way, or don't look at me that way, or why are you looking at me that way? How can I adjust myself to make myself more appealing to you so that society will see me in a certain way? Look for all of those kinds of things in the film as you watch it, because a lot of it builds to these moments of melodramatic excess involving the mother and daughter, which is obviously the heart of the maternal melodrama. And there's plenty of maternal melodrama in this film, believe me. Look at those relationships and think about where is the excess taking you? And how does that fit against all the backdrops that I've been talking about of Me Too, of China, and what's going on there? Okay, a little bit more of a spoiler here. There is sort of a happy ending. So think about, where is the triumph for Wu? Where is the triumph for the mother? What does the triumph mean? Think about the fact that the triumph comes by going against the indie world, against the boyfriend's ways of seeing the world and the ways of seeing cinema, and instead the triumph comes through the commercial cinema beloved of Ye. What does Ye love? War films. Anything that's against the Japanese occupation, especially. And what does Wu write? A war film. And what makes her some money? A war film against the Japanese. So it's this kind of taking the commercial industry and poking fun of it as an indie filmmaker. because women, of course, generally are excluded from making those kinds of war films, with a few exceptions. So when you look at this kind of nationalist propaganda that actually makes the day for Wu, think about, well, what is the humor behind that? Now, Girls Always Happy doesn't end there. So that's the denouement, but there is more to it. So think about what happens afterwards. Think about, once again, the reframing of the relationship between Wu and her mother, how you see the character taking control of the camera, paralleling herself as a director, of course, behind the screen as well, and the wonderful, wonderful, and oftentimes ironic ways in which she frames herself and her mother toward the end of the film, where she gets lost in those hutongs that she's so early on seems so at home in. So think about the ending. The ending is very unusual. It's an indie film ending. So even though the triumph comes through this fictitious war movie happy ending, then there's the second ending, which is very much an indie ending, very much ambiguous, kind of difficult to fathom. And I want you to think about, well, what do you think of the film's ending? Now, a lot of people ask me, we're going to have time for maybe a little bit of Q&A before we need to break at 2. But a lot of people, I'll answer the first question that I'm almost always asked when I talk about women filmmakers and filmmakers like Yang Mingming, particularly since I'm interested in looking at how women are taking possession of Chinese screens. And they ask me, are these people feminists? Okay. And it's interesting because often these women will comment on feminism. So Yang Mingming is, of course, commented on it and says these things like, well, you know, maybe I wouldn't use that word, but I do think women are more moral than men. So think about that as her kind of philosophical framing of this particular film, because in that kind of statement, well, what does that say, given everything you see in her depiction of Wu and Wu's mother in this film, and also the women in their circle? Are they really more moral than the men? And if so, what does that mean in terms of survival, of surviving as a woman in the film industry and surviving in this world of men where sexual harassment, of course, is a daily part of their life, but the male glance and the dismissal of men and the underestimation of men may even be more of an issue. Now, just final things. If you want to read more about Yang Mingming, please visit this website. I've written on her, there's a little bit of a bio on her, and some other articles, interviews with her. I think she's a fascinating up-and-coming filmmaker. I've written an article that's a more general article, or I have another talk on her films, a little bit more on film education. So visit this website too if you'd like to see more on other women filmmakers from inside and outside of China who are commenting on China today, particularly now because we've got the white paper uprisings going on where women are very much a part of those demonstrations. We've got all kinds of upheavals in the Chinese-speaking world in which women are an important part of that dynamic, particularly with the COVID-19 situation there, where women oftentimes bear the brunt domestically and also in times of frontline occupations. That's often underreported in American news. Also, please visit the companion site for more on Hong Kong-specific women filmmakers, and also like us on Facebook, where I often post articles, not just on Hong Kong women filmmakers, but also articles and information and news of interest. And finally, let me thank you all. 谢谢你.